Greetings and welcome to episode 18 of Bible 180, 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation, 10 to 15 minutes at a time. We're on Genesis 29 through 30, and today we're talking about how the 12 tribes of Israel came to be. Remember that Jacob's name was eventually changed to Israel after he had an encounter with God, and we get to the 12 sons, 12 tribes of Israel in a very, you might say, circuitous kind of way. So we left Jacob sleeping on a rock in the last episode with the angels coming up and down the ladder. Not Jacob's ladder, him going up, but the angels and God coming down. He is on his way to Laban, his uncle, who we will discover is just as much a schemer as Jacob was. Jacob wanted to go there kind of to escape his past. He wanted to get a white picket fence and a little labradoodle and a white picket fence and live happily ever after. So he gets to Laban's house and discovers that Laban has two daughters, Leah and Rachel. Rachel is a younger one, and Jacob falls head over heels for Rachel, the younger one. She is so beautiful it causes him to be weak in the knees and dry in the mouth, and he can hardly stand it. So he says to Laban, he says, "So what do I need to do to marry Rachel?" Laban said, "Okay, well, why don't you work 7 years for me on a family farm, and then I'll give you my younger daughter." You're not supposed to give the younger daughter first, but that's what Laban said. So Jacob worked 7 years and finally fulfilled that obligation. And at the time of the wedding, Jacob was ecstatic. Now, remember two things. One is that the promise of many descendants that God made to Abraham then went to Isaac, that now went to Jacob after he stole it from Esau, had not materialized. So that was one thing. Recognize the second thing is that this was several hundred years before God gave the 10 commandments about not committing adultery and not being married more to one person. So this was well before that. So here's what happened on the day of the wedding. Laban the schemer, after a whole lot of wine, Jacob goes to bed with who he thinks is going to be Rachel, but instead Laban substituted the older daughter, Leah, for Rachel on that wedding night. You know, she had the veil on and they walked in the canon and da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, all this kind of wonderful stuff. When Jacob wakes in the morning, he looks over and it's Leah. He's hungover and it's Leah and not Rachel. So he says, "What did you do?" And Laban said, "Well, if you really want Rachel, work another 7 years for me." So Jacob said, "Okay." So he works another 7 years. Now, that was way back in the day when the family farm maybe needed a lot of sons and children to work the family farm. That's why many people back in that day had multiple wives. The more sons, the more farm hands to carry out the cow and sheep manure. So Genesis 29, now, after they'd been married. Now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, so he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Remember the old TV show Desperate Housewives? Well, that's what we're getting into. Lot of drama here. Leah is desperate for love. Rachel is desperate for children. These women are sisters and are married to the same man. Those of you who are women think, how can you imagine a scenario when you and your sister are married to the same man and your husband really likes your sister much more than you? We read that Leah was unloved. That doesn't mean Jacob didn't love her. It just means that he loved her a whole lot less than Rachel. And as a result, a theme we'll see again and again through the Bible is that God often prefers the underdog. In this case, Leah is the underdog. And God opened her womb, but closed the womb of Rachel so she wouldn't have children. And Leah over time, not pretty quickly, but over years, began to conceive and bear 4 consecutive sons. Leah bore and conceived the first Reuben because the Lord had seen my affliction. And she conceived again and bore a son. She said, the Lord has heard that I am unloved, so he's given me this son also. She named him Simeon, whose name means hear or listen. She really wants to get Jacob's attention. So she says, listen up, dude. Here's another son. I'm going to name him Listen so that you might pay attention to me. But of course, Jacob doesn't love her like she wishes, and he doesn't listen to her. In a couple verses later, Leah conceived again and bore a son. And she said, now this time my husband will be attracted to me. So she called him Levi. The name Levi means attached or associated, because Leah is so desperate to win her husband's love. And she thinks by giving him 3 sons, that 3 is going to be the charm. Not so. Later in chapter 29, she conceives and bears a 4th son, and says, this time I will praise the Lord. So she calls him Judah. Judah, we'll see, ends up being one of the really good sons. Judah means praise. Praise is a perfect name for this son because Jesus, the Messiah, would come through the line of Judah, okay? The 4th son of Leah. Jesus would eventually come through the line of Judah from Leah, the lesser loved wife. So the last phrase of chapter 29 reads, then she stopped bearing. So in quick succession, she gives birth to 4 boys, and after the 4th one, she gives praise to God. She quit bearing children, and maybe she came to terms with the fact that Jacob is just not going to love her like he should, like she wanted him to. Chapter 30, verses 1 through 8, begins with a bang. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. Okay, Rachel, the desperate housewife, lets Jacob have it with both guns loaded, and Jacob's response in verse 2 is about as insensitive as she could have received. Here's what verse 2 says. After she says, give me children or I die, then in the next verse, then Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? I mean, that's a horrible thing to say. I mean, he says, it's not my fault you don't have kids. Don't go after me. Go after God. I've already had 4 sons with your sister. Jacob is not Mr. Sensitivity at this. Don't try this at home, okay? Because at this moment in the story, Rachel does not need a lecture on theology or gynecology. She needs a gentle and loving understanding of her husband and the encouragement that only his love could provide. Rachel must have been crushed, but apparently realizing she had no option, she did what wives did at that point, and she says to Jacob, she says, okay, here's my maid Bilhah, go into her that she may bear on my knees, and through her I too may have children. So she gave him Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob had a son with Rachel's maid. Okay, so our story continues. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, finally God has heard me and given me a son. So she calls this son Dan, which means vindicated. Rachel falsely assumes that God is pleased with her schemes by attributing Dan's birth to God. I'm vindicated. Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a 2nd son. So Jacob said, with mighty wrestling I have wrestled with my sister, and I have indeed prevailed. Ha ha! So she named him Naphtali, which means mighty wrestling. Rachel adopts both Bilhah's sons as her own. Now, a little later, in chapter 30, the war of the womb intensifies. Since Rachel has 2 surrogate children, Leah gets back into the jealousy game. Up until now, Leah has produced her own children, but now that she is no longer conceiving, Leah, she resorts to the same tactic that Rachel does. Her motto is, anything you can do, I can do better. So in chapter 30, we read these words, 30 verse 9 through 13. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Jacob's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, this is awesome. I'm going to call him Gad, which means fortunate. That's like naming your kid Vegas or Reno or Lotto. Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. She said, happy am I, for women will call me happy. So she named her son Asher, which means happy. Leah had temporarily turned Jacob's attention from away from her sister Rachel, and Leah seems to have lost her focus. She's only focused on her happiness now and what other women might say. This is not what God really wanted, but it was a way for her to get another son. The story of Jacob continues with more sons born and more heartache delivered. Leah spends her whole life trying to win Jacob's approval. Rachel spends her whole life trying to have more children for her husband. In this story, both women want what the other one had. Leah felt like having sons would get Jacob's attention. Rachel was so desperate for children, as Sarah had been before her, that giving birth degenerated into competition. Eventually, 12 sons were born to Rachel and Leah, and their maids Bilhah and Zilpah. And even through the entire ordeal, Rachel and Leah were unhappy with their circumstances. Rachel said, if I only had sons like my sister. Leah said, if I only had my sister's beauty and the love of Jacob. If only. If only. If only. You know, sometimes we just live in an if only world. If only this could happen. If only I worked 7 years. If only if I could have children. If only I had the love. If only, if only, if only. If only always is looking for something else. An if only world. And if we always focus on the if only this were different, if only I had more money, if only I had fill in your if onlys, but then you miss out on God's what if. God's what if goes like this. What if you trusted me? What if you grew closer to me during times of testing? What if you remember that if God is for you, it doesn't matter what comes against you? What if you use time of frustration, isolation, difficulty as a chance to deepen your faith and grow closer to God? What if you really believed that no matter what, God was with you? What if you just simply trusted God, gave up all kinds of if only, and trusted God? What if you simply did what God was asking Noah to do in the ark? Just trust me. I'm not going to give you a rudder so you can steer. I'm not asking you to be my co-pilot. I'm asking to be your pilot. I'm asking you to simply trust. I think that the story of Jacob and all of the finaglings, the mess of the time, yes, it eventually does give him the 12 tribes of Israel, as Jacob's name is changed to Israel, but he lived in such a, if only something were different. Rachel, Leah, if only. Focus is not on what we have and what we should be grateful for, but what we don't have. It focuses us on something we think we need rather than something we already have. That's why I encourage you to begin a day. It's going to be a great day. End a day with God. These are some things for which I am grateful. It centers you around the premise that if we trust God, our lives will go in a direction, even though we might not always understand it, but will go in a much better direction rather than us always seeking the if only something were different. Gratitude helps us just realize God loves us and cares for us, and ain't nothing anywhere, anytime that's going to separate us from that love. So Jacob learns the hard lesson about finally trusting God, and you can learn that without having going through all of the mess that he did. So trust, be grateful, and I will see you at the next episode. Until then, make it a great day. Bye-bye.